Hello, good day to you all. This is the TRC Podcast, and I am your host, Jake. Along with me are my colleagues, Ryan and Adam, and we're here to talk about racing, but in a more hopefully insightful way than you get with traditional racing media. I mean, obviously, we'll shoot the breeze about the races like any show would, but we'll also delve into the analytics, shedding a light on the sport from a deeper level, as we always do, and I'm looking forward to that. But first, of course, we need to address a couple of things. I know we didn't have a show last week. Sorry to those of you listening, but it was just a chaotic time. Merb, our great technician, is on a month-long hiatus while he travels the country and meets with friends. Merb, if you're listening, hope you're doing well and enjoying it. On top of that, Ryan and Alex were both strapped for free time, so we thought it best just to take the week off, rather than try to do a patchwork show at odd hours. But congrats, obviously, to Tyler Reddick and his first career win at Road America. That was definitely a popular victory, not just among the garage, but among our group. He's Merb's guy, pretty much, so he's very happy about that. Not really much else to speak of from that event, which wasn't really a barn burner, to put it bluntly. Uh, but we'll be focusing on this week in that case. But don't worry, we didn't forget. Speaking of Alex, I'm sure you've noticed he isn't here in his usual role as the host. Unfortunately, the responsibilities and business of life have made his schedule too frantic to run the podcast or be an every week participant. That's disappointing news, certainly, and sorry for that, but it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances. But don't worry, Alex will still be here as an occasional guest when his situation allows it, so he's very much still part of the fold here. And we're all thinking of you, Alex. In the meantime, I'm going to be the quote unquote host of the show, even though really this is more of an ensemble effort. My friends here do more than me. I'm just sort of moderating. And I'm also doing the tech for the show temporarily. As I said before, Merb is on a trip. We're all looking forward to his return next month, but for now, it's a three-man show. Again, sorry for the change up, but we're committed to making this work, and I hope I can do Alex's job competently. With all that said, let's get into it. Normally, we'd start with the cup race, and we will get to that, but we have to open by talking about Parker Kligerman. As faithful followers of this podcast know, we are all backers of him. He gave us a shout out on social media shortly after we began. By all appearances and accounts, he seems like a great guy, and as we saw the other day, he's a superb talent behind the wheel. I'm sure later on we'll talk about what an injustice it is that he doesn't have a full-time quality ride in the National Touring Series, but for now, as I turn it over to my colleagues, let's just talk about Mid-Ohio and how meaningful of an event this was for us.
Oh yeah, so I guess I'm kind of the biggest Parker stan here, kind of. Yeah, I was on the road that whole race until like the last couple laps, and I kept constantly checking the chat, like, is he still leading? Is how many laps left? And I mean, he won at Talladega in 2017. I missed that race because I was actually doing the Daytona driving experience that day, so I missed that. So very, very happy to see him win. I honestly think I can't remember the last time I was happier for a guy winning and just more invested in a guy winning in any of the top three series who besides Chase Elliott. I mean, Brandon Brown, I think last year kind of comes to mind. Another guy I've been I kind of got on that bandwagon early. He's local for me from Woodbridge, Virginia, and just a guy who I think, despite a certain distraction that came up after that, but always is, and that wasn't even his fault, but he's always very likable. Always gets more out of that car, and Parker's the same way. I try to root for a lot of guys like that who I feel like aren't getting the attention they deserve, either from from the media, from the sport in general, and even from fans. Like, I know fans can sometimes kind of ruin an underdog if they go off about him too much, and if the broadcast talks about him all the time. Cough, cough, Michael McDowell. But guys like Parker and Timmy Hill and Tommy Joe Martins, B.J. McLeod, those are all guys I'll always root for. And Parker specifically, I firmly believe if he had been developed properly, if he'd landed on his feet like in Cup, like if he'd been developed by Penske and gotten to Cup, he might be doing what Ross Chastain is doing right now, who's, I guess, another guy we'll talk about later for different reasons. But, he's overachieved in every car or truck he's pretty much ever had, maybe with the possible exception of his KBM Xfinity year where Kyle Busch also couldn't win in that car. So, I thought when he was in the Gaunt Brothers in the 96, I thought he did better in that car than Daniel Suarez ended up doing. So, we've seen Suarez now pan out, so I think that absolutely tells me put Parker in a Trackhouse car in Cup right now, he'd be contending to win races. And what he does in that truck is, here's some stats I'm going to throw out for you. I did tweet some of this from the analytics account, but he has the second best average running position of anyone in trucks this year, only behind Zane Smith. He has the third best ETDR this year of guys who've run at least 5 races. Only Zane and actually Ryan Preece is higher in terms of averages. And the most impressive thing about that is that it's not the equipment bump that's doing that for him. It's not the fact that his equipment isn't very good, because if anything, that's hurting him. I've mentioned before that my equipment metric, the one flaw in it is that it treats single car and single truck teams like it's just whatever your average running position is. So it treats Kligerman, whenever he's in these truck races, it treats him like he has one of the best trucks in the field because he always runs up front. And on Saturday, his ARP was 1. So it treated him like he had a first-place truck, like the best truck in the field. And yet, besides that, he still had the second-best ETDR rating of any truck driver in any race this year. And I fiddled around with, if I just put his equipment rating as what his average running position all year has been, it would have been the best of any driver in any top 3 series race all year, and even that probably undersells him a lot. It's pretty much a pipe dream at this point, but seriously, somebody get that guy, if not in a competitive Cup ride, a competitive championship contending truck, when we've got Jack Wood out there running 25th for GMS every week, and Haley Deegan, always in the wall and running 20th in trucks that other guys are winning with. And I don't even need to get started on Nice's lineup outside of Hocevar, but Parker can't run for a championship somehow in that series, and it's not fair. But regardless, great win, and I was glad I was able to catch this one.
Yeah, well, Ryan summed it up pretty well. I don't have too much more to add to that, but yeah, I root for justice to prevail, and in this case, I think Parker Kligerman having a full-time ride in a good car in a national series is the only way that I will consider justice to be served. And so I'm hoping that with this win, it'll catch the attention of an owner with deep pockets, and they'll realize, hey, we can win races with this guy. I frankly have no idea why it hasn't happened yet. Parker has a media presence. He's a good guy. It's not like he's caused any controversy. There's no reason.
I think we all know why.
Well, yeah, he doesn't have money.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really, really frustrating. But yeah, I was rooting hard for him at the end of that race. Man, those last couple laps when Zane Smith was hounding him, I was just hoping he wouldn't get wrecked, because we know how the truck series is, where the leader pretty much gets wrecked almost every week, it seems. And I'll give Zane credit. He raced him really clean and showed him respect, because Parker pushed him to the win earlier this year. And
yeah, I forgot all about that. Yeah, after that I was like, he owes him one now. So
yeah, because Parker
definitely respects Zane.
I think Parker mentioned that on the telecast too. And It was really, really cool to see the emotion with the crew chief, Chris Carrier, on the 75 truck. He was in tears after they won because it's like you could tell it meant the world to these guys. It wasn't just like some corporate team with a bunch of, big wigs running it. This is like a family with a handful of guys, and they really appreciated that in a way that a big team probably wouldn't. So it was just a great story all around, and I hope it leads to something more for Parker.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about when you see guys like him, or when Brandon Brown won last year, or anytime Kurt Busch wins. It's just, you can just tell how gracious they are, how humble they are, because they know they hadn't, they don't know how much longer they're going to have these chances. They're grateful for the fact that they have them at all. I guess in Kurt's case, kind of almost killed his own career at a few points, but it's just so great to see the emotion from a lot of these guys when they win, as opposed to, your general kind of corporate cookie cutter type of guy who just kind of gives a generic sort of, blah blah blah, happy to win kind of interview.
Yeah, that's something that always bothered me about guys like Kevin Harvick, for example, is that he never seems really that grateful when he wins. It's more just, thank your sponsors and then get out of there.
Mm-hmm. Kyle Busch in the lower series is pretty much the ultimate example of
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
It just sucks the energy out of the entire race.
Yeah. So, I just, if there's one thing I would change about motorsports, it's that I wish talent triumphed over money, but I don't know that we're ever going to be in that world again, unfortunately. So in the meantime, we can just root for these rare underdog stories to happen.
Yeah, and kind of another guy I want to talk about real briefly there is a one-time teammate of Parker Kligerman's, who, we're on this whole subject of guys who really deserve better, and in this case, a guy who deserved better in the past tense, because he ended up deciding to retire very prematurely when he wasn't getting chances anymore. But Cole Witt, I think, is another guy I look at as, and I've touched on before, but he could be contending for cup championships right now in a different world. Yeah, I said championships, not wins. Some of the guys he's been teammates with, Kligerman was one of them. Alex Bowman was another one. Corey LaJoie, I think, at one point. Yeah, he split the 72 car with Corey LaJoie, so kind of a teammate, and he destroyed all those guys. So, them and I guess Corey LaJoie would be another one who we will talk about today.
We'll get to that.
Yep. So, yeah, when you see somebody like Alex Bowman or Matt DiBenedetto a few years ago, get those chances in Cup after having to drive really bad cars at some point, it's such a breath of fresh air, I think. Even if they end up maybe not lighting the world on fire, I think in Matt DiBenedetto's case, he was a guy who everybody wanted to win for a while, and then kind of for different reasons, kind of killed his own career in a way, and now he's kind of back to overachieving in a truck that's probably not that good. That's a big part of why I've always liked Bowman. Aside from him being kind of the series resident, sort of chaotic good, I guess. And yeah, I think what had a lot to do with it was obviously going downhill way before this, but I think the thing that probably put it past the point of no return was charters. And I've said this before. I think charters are the single worst thing that ever happened to NASCAR in my time watching it, because it really was the moment that, and I'm not one of those fans. I'll preface this with saying I'm not one of those fans who kind of looks at everything from the Winston Cup era with rose-colored glasses. But the thing I really think that it has to be said that NASCAR is kind of fundamentally rooted in this grassroots culture where separates it from the stick and ball world is that you can be a small time team, you can be a driver who doesn't have the built-in advantages, and you can work your way up. And you know, Hendrick started like that. Furniture Row just 5 years ago won a championship after being a field filler. And you used to have 40. You had 43 cars in the field, and you'd have 50 cars trying to get into races, and then in some of those, in the Daytona 500, you would have these small teams just make the race, and it would completely, make their world. You would have these success stories that had the chance down the line to turn into much bigger success stories, like what Furniture Row ended up doing, but charters killed all that, and just all these corporate bigwigs decided to basically kick the ladder out from underneath them so that they could make the sport their own private, exclusive F1 type of echo chamber. And if you're not grandfathered in, then too bad. And, it's just totally made it that much harder for guys like Bowman and, DiBenedetto and now guys like Kligerman who are locked out. And it's just not fair to them.
Yeah, and I'll add to that the part of the issue with the charters is that we have essentially 5 out of the 36 cars every week that are not really trying to win. Maybe the 7 car was trying to win this week, but basically we have 5 spots taken up that are just corporate, well, not so much McLeod,
Crap.
but Spire and Rick Ware Racing are only in it for the money. They're only in it to own the charter for a few years and then flip it for $10 million or whatever they get now. And that is very bad for the sport. Because think about if those 4 spots could be opened up for guys like Kligerman and Cole Witt. But instead, we're watching J.J. Elliott in his geriatric age, and Joey Gase and Cody Ware, and God knows who else takes up those rides anymore.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, if we didn't have charters, those cars would still have a chance to be out there, and they would have a chance to get better because everybody would be pushing them to get better instead of having this locked-in spot every week. They would be out there failing to qualify for races, trying to get better, and then we would still have better cars on the grid every week that would be filled with those drivers like Kligerman and DiBenedetto. We're not even 10 years removed from guys like Casey Mears being able to putz around who were 25th place drivers probably at best. And now, you've got guys being forced to retire, the second that they start slowing down at all. Kenseth, even when he came back, he wasn't that good anymore, but he was still winning races in his last full-time season. And, DiBenedetto's a 15th place Cup driver probably a couple of years ago. He can't even get a ride anymore, and he was not going to get a ride even before he stuck his foot in his mouth. And it's, like I said, it's just made it this totally exclusive kind of country club, like the way F1 is, and I just hate that. I do think overall NASCAR is, between the parity, the schedule, and the racing with the Gen 7, I think it's in the best place it's been in a long time, but, I really do miss the days when you would have these small-time teams and small-time drivers that had a chance and, could get their foot in the door and then just work their way up, but now, the door's closed.
Yeah, it's really just another example of corporate greed ruining a system that was working just fine. And NASCAR has this thing where allegedly if a team finishes I think it's in the bottom 3 in owner points for 3 years in a row, then they can have their charter taken away. But the teams swap points between each other all the time to prevent that from happening. And B, even if it did happen, I don't think NASCAR would take their charter away because I don't think they have the balls to stand up to these corporate assholes and, take away their extra source of profit. So, I mean, barring something beyond what I can imagine, I think we're stuck with this system for a while. And, we just have to hope that someone like, I don't know, like Dale Earnhardt Jr. might come in with Junior Motorsports. Maybe he'll buy up one or two of the, the Rick Ware charters, for example.
It's
Or,
kind of the best thing we can hope for is that Junior opens his Cup team and Trackhouse and 23XI keep expanding, and we eventually get 36 competitive cars on the Cup grid. But that's, I look back at when I started watching in 2007, you had 43 competitive cars on the Cup grid. They didn't all have good drivers in them, but they could all run top 10 on a good day, pretty much. I guess with the exception of Furniture Row back then, BAM Racing, and the Front Row, what they were back then. But, I mean, you had 50 cars attempting every race, and the 43 that got in were usually competitive. I guess, the one good thing I guess I'll say is that I once ratioed the hell out of Rob Kaufman on Twitter. I'm very proud of that. So, true story.
Nice. I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. I think it's my most liked tweet ever.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't have a ton to add to some of the stuff that you said about Kligerman, because I think we all feel pretty much the same way about that. But on the teams thing and the general idea of guys not getting the shots that they really deserve, in the top series. It's a double-edged sword because, I mean, I'm the last one, to play like devil's advocate, whataboutisms, but, obviously there's never going to be a perfect system where everyone that, deserves to get a shot does, but I feel like within a realistic scope, that what we had in NASCAR pre-charters was probably the closest thing that we could get to that. And we all know that the stranglehold that corporate sponsorship has over it, which is bad, and it's really frustrating and annoying how some guys, like, nothing against them, but like, guys that just happen to get lucky, like Eric Almirola having his longtime partnership with Smithfield, pretty much can get ride security for years on end, but other guys like Kligerman and Cole Witt, and a lot of these other guys that were especially a casualty of the early 2011s, Cup guys dipping into Xfinity Series, they can't get rides like that, and that's frustrating. But the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of caution on that is that, let me try to think of what I'm saying here. In one way, what F1 has, I guess, is kind of slightly better, even though there's still pay drivers in F1, because, or maybe not. I probably shouldn't even have said that. I don't even think it's even better on that sense, but it's just a different way of going about things. You might have a few more guys in F1 that get a shot in the top series, just because of not, they're not at least blocked so much by corporate sponsorship. But in their case, you have this dichotomy where every team has this two-driver hierarchy, and if you're not number one most of the time, you're going to be screwed. And that's something that, as much as we complain about the corporate part of NASCAR and the sponsorship, which is a legitimate gripe, that does protect us, like, in one sense, from having that kind of situation where, where you've literally got guys in F1 that are ordered to pull over for other drivers to take the lead, and not go for the win in races. And so, like, that's kind of sort of a safeguard. But at the same time,
I'm not really that educated on the charters because I never really read up that much on it. I just know that it's bad. The effect that it's had has been really bad. And while the kind of competitive boom that we had in the 2000s was never really going to be sustainable because of, just the fact that, there was a time in the early 2000s when we had every car in the field had a Fortune 500 sponsor. And when the economy collapsed in 2008, obviously the effective field size shrunk a lot, and that couldn't be helped, again, because of the way the sport is tied so much to sponsorship. And so it went down some, and it definitely wasn't even in the late 2000s. It wasn't quite what it was in the early 2000s, and then in, like, say, 2014, it definitely wasn't what it was in the late 2000s. But when charters came in, that absolutely just hacked everything. And nowadays we're lucky to have 30 competitive cars running in a field. I won't go on much else about that because you two pretty much already said it right. But, I agree with everything that's being said, but I'm just trying to, kind of provide the other end of that where, like, this system that we have here is crap. I'm not going to argue with that. But really, at this point, I can't say the system in any series is really good when it comes to that. It's just you're kind of trading one problem for another in terms of that.
I have noticed that. I think I made a comment on this earlier today, but IndyCar seems like it's got more teams coming in right now. The parity's gotten a lot better in the last few years with this infusion of young talent there. It seems like any average to above average driver there can get a ride. I guess you'll occasionally see guys kind of fall through the cracks, like Carlos Munoz a few years ago. Sean always talks about him. But I think there's very few examples in IndyCar of guys who really deserve better that don't end up getting better. And yeah, NASCAR, I think, really only got to be this bad ever since charters showed up. The whole back third of the field just started dropping like flies. Tommy Baldwin Racing, H. Scott, all those teams that were, they weren't great. They were underdog teams, but they could run 20th on a good day, and the drivers there could do enough to get better opportunities. Alex Bowman was with TBR, and BK Racing, that was another one. And those teams just all died, and now nobody who thinks they have any future for themselves is going to willingly sign with Rick Ware Racing or Spire, at least with the 77. I think the 7 is decent. It gets their best stuff, and Corey LaJoie has a chance to get better. And let's actually talk about him now. I guess we've kind of gone on about this long enough.
I promise we'll get to that. But there's just one more thing I want to say, and we will talk about the race. On what we've been talking about, not to belabor the point, because we've been on it a while, but I believe, I don't know whether it has to do with directly with the charter agreement or not, what exactly changed, but there used to be a stipulation in the TV contracts, and the way the tracks got their money and TV got their money, that there had to be 43 cars that showed up for a race in the Cup Series. And they actually used to pay the teams, the start and park teams, to start and park, to participate the race, and say that they were on there, and they got their prize money, and then the tracks and the TV, they got their money, and everybody was happy. But since the charter agreement, and again, I don't know exactly what was codified in it that changed it, but for starters, the max field size went from 43 down to 40, which that itself isn't really a big deal, but there's no I guess, minimum amount of cars that are required to be in a race, and that's why very rarely,
Well, it's
occasionally, we might
36.
get a race that has 40 cars in it. Yeah, but a lot of times, like this weekend, it's as few as 36, and that's not a good sign.
Mm-hmm. I will say that I do not miss Starting Park. I do not miss when you would have Joe Nemechek and whoever else out there just, you know, taking up spots who had really no use for being in the field, and but that had kind of gone away by 2015 or so, and you had guys DNQing again, and everybody who made the race would run the full race, or they would try to. So yeah, moral of the story here is corporations ruin everything, money ruins everything, um, and I think that's kind of all we need to say.
Okay. All right. Well, hang on here a second. Uh, well, that was a good conversation that I think really needed to be had. We kind of touched on it before, but it hadn't really gone in depth with it. I'm glad we finally did. But that being said, there was other races that went on this week, or were other races. Um, and obviously the foremost one would be the Cup race that happened yesterday. So just what are your guys' general thoughts about it? You can talk about whatever you like to. What do you say, Adam?
Well, my general thought is that I am basically an Atlanta stan now because I think that they did an awesome job turning the track into what it is now. Because what we essentially have is early 2000s Daytona, where they run in a pack with fresh tires for a few laps, and then the handling starts to go away, and then they get spread out, and the cars get loose, and it's a combination of drafting and wrestling an ill-handling car, and that's a lot of fun. I mean, even Austin Dillon, after he got wrecked, in his interview, he mentioned how much fun it was to drive on that track, and I think that if they would have repaved Atlanta without reconfiguring it, we would have just another crappy intermediate with one
Be another
groove, as we
Texas.
always do, for 5 to 10 years with fresh pavement. And I don't think anybody has the patience to deal with that. It probably would have taken till 2028 or so before we had the old rough Atlanta back that people loved. So I think with that being the alternative, I'm glad they turned it into a mini super speedway. And frankly, I think it's better than Daytona and Talladega because it's not nearly as random. I mean, the best super speedway drivers seem to rise to the top quicker, and you don't have, a bunch of slow guys just randomly appearing at the front every few laps. And the best drivers this season, Elliott, Chastain, and Blaney, they basically were the best three drivers in this race, and that's really good to see because I think it legitimizes the track and the style of racing at the track. So, what do you think, Ryan?
I absolutely amen to all that. I think you can drive your way to the front. You can pass in the pack without really getting out of line. Uh, and But you still have that whole equalizer sort of guys like Corey LaJoy can run up front, and that's the best of both worlds in my opinion. I think plate racing today is way too random. Uh, I think especially with the amount of wrecks we have, guys just end up in the top 10 at the ends of these races that have no place belonging there. The Ryan Newman special, I guess we'll call it. And you don't really have that with this. You did have like Cole Custer and Austin Cindric both ended up with good finishes that ETDR came out a lot worse for them. In Custer's case, though, it's kind of about time he gets a finish better than he deserves. And Cindric, though, has kind of turned into one of this season's premier trolls for finishing a lot better than he runs. He's had like the last 4 weeks top tens, and I think Road America was the only one where he really deserved one. And then as for the finish, I will say obviously I'm a Chase fan, but yesterday I was more than anything I was really gutted for Jake mainly, and I kind of there was part of me that wanted to see Corey LaJoie win that, and I did not like the way that race ended. I thought, Chase did what he had to do, but I just really don't like to see races won like that, especially when, given that it's Chase, who I've already gone on my soapbox about how, other than Bubba Wallace, for reasons we don't need to get into, no driver has more toxic haters than Chase Elliott does that heavily outweigh, by the way, the amount of these supposed Chase fans who think he does no wrong that I'm told make up 90% of NASCAR fans, as if they're Junior Nation, throwing beer bottles at the other drivers and whatnot, and all these whataboutisms and herd mentality, devil's advocacy when it comes to him just never ceases to get on my last nerve, which I will not lie is probably one of the biggest reasons I pull for him at this point, because it's just the people who hate him are the most simple-minded, most, just complete lack of critical thinking ability fans out there. Once again, other than certain people who hold certain things against Bubba. I'm always glad to get a win, but and I also don't think Chase was the biggest weapon of the race. Obviously, that would be the guy who finished second, who at this point has proven himself to be basically, if you imagine Brian Vickers, but if he was really, really talented, or some people have compared him to Ernie Irvan. It's just at this point, you're kind of waiting for when is he going to stand up in the drivers' meeting and issue a public apology to everybody that ends up being a drive into deep left field by Castellanos, and that'll be a home run.
Yeah, I can answer that
Yeah,
question.
I guess we can
Never, never.
Talk about that, I guess.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll first just talk about my kind of general view of the race and then get into that stuff. I was very, very skeptical about Atlanta coming into this season when they made the changes. I got the argument of well, if they just repave it, it's going to become another crappy intermediate, and it had to be repaved. They just couldn't go on any longer because, the track was just falling apart, and the racing, well, to be blunt, sucked the last few years there for the most part, because the track had just gotten so worn and chewed up the tires so fast. But I really wasn't enamored with the idea of having another kind of either super speedway or hybrid super speedway type race, especially on a much narrower and easy for me to say that word, much more narrow track like Atlanta, which apparently wasn't narrow enough. They decided they need to make it even more narrow in the corners, but that's another story. And I was not looking forward to it. I honestly thought that if there was going to be any race that might even be a safety hazard, it would be these races. But I was very, very pleasantly surprised back in March that if you looked at my ratings for all the races this season, I still have Atlanta, the first race in March, as my highest rated event of the season. Now, I don't necessarily think it's the best event this year, but I just kind of had the least amount of bad things for me, and I enjoyed it. It had the most amount of on-track lead changes this year, even more than Daytona and Talladega, incredibly. And somehow, as Adam kind of said before, it's worked out to where it kind of feels less random than a lot the way these Daytona and Talladega races have been going. And there's numbers to back that up, which I'm sure you two will get to in the next segment. But I enjoyed the race a lot in March. This race wasn't quite as good, from my standpoint, but it was still very enjoyable. We still had 23 on-track lead changes, tied for the second most this year with the Daytona 500. There weren't too many real lulls in the action. There was a decent amount of intensity throughout, and it actually was a pretty fair race result-wise, which, that's a very, very rare thing when you talk about the ends of any kind of super speedway type race. And I'll also say I was pleasantly surprised yesterday because I was kind of expecting it to be not nearly as good because the Xfinity race was not that good. The Xfinity race was kind of like a bad 550 era package race. Like, you remember like some of those races that we had like at Fontana or Pocono or whatever, where they just got spread out pretty fast and there wasn't enough of a driver factor in it and tire factor for handling to really make a difference, but yet at the same time, nobody could really keep up and stay in a pack. But as a testament to this car that we have now, I guess the way it works, the Cup guys were able to stay together and have a very competitive race throughout. And I really enjoyed that. There were some parts that had to do with the results, obviously, that I did not care for. But quality of race-wise, I didn't have any big problems with it. My only qualm, I guess I would say, about the track is that it is still too narrow, in my opinion, which caused some, bull crap like we saw with Garrett Smithley yesterday. But, there's going to be occupational hazards no matter where you go, so, you got to deal with it when it happens. But I've been very pleasantly surprised by Atlanta, and it's definitely one of my favorite tracks, and I definitely like it more as a super speedway style race than Daytona or Talladega. And as far as the drivers that you mentioned, yes, for those that maybe are new or don't have the background, I am a Corey LaJoie backer. He is my favorite Cup driver. Now, I'm not a diehard fan of him. I'm not. I was a Dale Jr. fan for 15 years, and there will never be another person like him for me, another sports figure like him for me, where I almost just kind of live or die on how he performs. But I guess you could say the closest thing to that is Corey LaJoie. I've really admired his struggle the last decade to go up through the ranks. Obviously his personality isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I appreciate his honesty and his candidness. And he's a very talented driver. He won. Did he win, or was he second or third in the 2012 K&N S Series? Which one was it?
I think he was second to Larson.
Yeah, he beat like a lot of. That was a loaded class in 2012 in the K&N Series because it had, I think, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, a couple of other guys, Bubba Wallace,
Blaney, I think.
Brett Moffitt. Yeah, Blaney. That was just a stacked class that LaJoie was in, and he beat a lot of those guys. I think he even led the most laps that season, and was technically the most dominant driver, even though he didn't win the championship. But in any case, it's been really difficult to see him struggle in this car that he's in. I don't want to go on all day here, but I'll just to put it shortly. He's not been the best at like picking what rides he should be in, which is not a good thing when he's already kind of limited to start with. And he is just not in a good situation with the Spire Motorsports ride that we have. Like, Adam can tell you a lot more about that than even I can because he kind of, has more knowledge about that situation than me. But, he pretty much most of the time is just struggling to run even in the top 25 with this car. Like most of the races, the car just lays down the straightaways like a dog. There's no speed in the car, but, as we all know, super speedways are the great equalizer when it comes to smaller teams and drivers that can take race cars with lesser budgets and be competitive. And we saw the perfect example of that yesterday. Good Lord, Corey LaJoie just drove his heart out. Like, bias aside, he was minimum the second best driver of the race yesterday. He was up there mixing it up with the very best that NASCAR has to offer, the best super speedway drivers NASCAR has to offer, pulling off slick moves, staying in the top 3 for the last, I think, 70 laps in a row in that slower race car. He did, I think, pretty much everything he could have done in the race. On the last restart, he was just a sitting duck because, there really wasn't much that he could do. I don't think he could have done anything differently. He got passed by a monster run by Chase that was indefensible. He managed to still keep himself in second place with a shot after that. And then he made one last gasp attempt to get on the outside Chase, but there just wasn't room. And what happened, and that was it. And it was definitely a heartbreaker, but that's the way it goes sometimes. I certainly don't hold any ill will towards Chase for what he did. That was just a case of the nature of the beast at super speedway racing. That happens at the end of every one of these races. You can complain about it and talk about what's right or wrong with it, but it is what it is.
No, don't you see?
Every race.
Chase is the first driver in NASCAR history to ever throw a block like that. That's what I've been told by Twitter today.
Well, Tony Stroll would probably agree with that too, but we're not talking about him today. But
Good.
But yeah, good, exactly. But yeah, he drove his heart out and he gave it his all, and it just wasn't meant to be. I just hope that doesn't encourage him to stay in this situation just because he had one kind of miracle race, and that he's able to get a better ride at some point. But we'll just have to wait and see on that. And I've gone on long enough, but I'll just briefly kind of mention that yes, Ross Chastain, he was a weapon yesterday. There's no getting around it. And Ross is not my favorite driver, or maybe even my second favorite driver, but I have sort of been a supporter of him, just because he's just. I'm gonna have to edit this stuff out later. I'm having trouble getting my thoughts together. I kind of fell for his story, where much like Alex Bowman and some of these other guys that haven't made it that we were talking about in the previous section have done. He's scrounged and really worked super hard for a decade, never really knowing, what was going to happen the next day, if he was going to have a ride the next time, and just surviving to get where he's at today. And he's made it. He's in one of the best cars in the field for, possibly the best team owner in the sport. And he's doing really well. He's having a great season, but unfortunately he just, I don't really know a PC friendly enough term to put it, but he's just one of those people that cannot seem to help himself. And at this point, like the first couple of times or even 2 or 3 times that he done that, I was willing to kind of defend him and say, well, people were just making a big deal out of this and, blah, blah, blah. But at this point, I can't play mental gymnastics for him anymore. And, I'm sort of kind of trying to emotionally distance myself from him when it comes to being a quote unquote supporter of his, because, I know there's going to be consequences down the road, and he's brought it on himself. I still, on a certain level, like him because I do kind of in the same way I do with Corey LaJoie. I appreciate his authenticity and his honesty. I don't think anybody here really denies that. And and he seems to actually have the self-awareness to understand what he's doing. He seems smart, but he just can't seem to help himself. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon. And he's just going to have to learn that lesson the hard way. And, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't really, really dreading like later this year, whenever it is that Denny like gets him, and I don't know when it's going to be or where or what the consequences of it are going to be. But even though Ross will fully deserve it, I am still dreading the hell out of that. But
Yeah, I don't really have
he's a talented driver.
I don't really have anything to say about my main punching bag this week. The driver of the 11 car. Other than that, I thought his interview was very reminiscent of kind of some of those Carl Edwards passive-aggressive interviews where it's like, oh, I'm not mad, but, you can tell, you can read between the lines, and he is pissed off and absolutely, I think, going to dump Ross at some point later this year, probably in the playoffs, probably in an elimination race. Get your popcorn ready.
Only thing I'll say about that is that, that's probably correct, but the only faint hope that maybe Ross has is that Denny is not normally nearly as efficient as Carl Edwards when it comes to getting his stuff done, as we all know. So that's like maybe the only prayer he has. But again, I still respect Ross, but I completely understand why people are mad at him, and I don't want to take anything more from him. And like I said, Justin Marks has pretty much said that he's not going to really talk to Ross about it. He sees absolutely nothing wrong with the way he drives. He agrees with Kyle Petty, and I love Justin Marks. I think he's the best team owner in NASCAR. He's a really nice guy. I've actually personally corresponded with him, and I can pretty much testify that he is a quality individual. But this is one area where he's stupid. But I went on for about 15 minutes now, so I'll pass off to you and whatever you guys want to add about the race.
Well,
yeah, I was just going to go back to LaJoy for a second and say I remember a few years ago when this was back when he was with Go Fast Racing, and he had the opportunity to go to front row, but stuck with Go Fast Racing because they got supposedly a Stewart-Haas alliance that was supposed to make them faster, but it didn't. And we've seen front row ever since then really kind of take off as being this team that I think is much better than a lot of people realize, just because they've had 3 or 4 rookies in a row in their second car and no continuity there.
They've got
because a guy like Michael McDowell, who has been a 30th place driver, his whole career, he does not suddenly become this much better this late in his career without the cars getting a lot faster.
He's the most overrated guy in the field, combined with a nice, likable guy, but at best probably 20th place driver, rookie driver. So yeah, that they are clearly not getting the results that they could be with better drivers. To parlay off of what you said, yes, that happened with Corey LaJoy at Go Fast. And then, unfortunately, it kind of happened again with Spire. The story there is a few years ago, Justin Marks actually was an employee at Spire, and Steve Letarte was a consultant. And it seemed like Spire might become a legitimate operation one day. They weren't good in Cup before 2020, but they weren't the worst team that there was, and it seemed like there might be some room for potential growth there. And Corey actually said, he didn't say what teams he turned down, but he said that he turned down supposedly equal or better offers, in his own words, to go to other teams in order to go for Spire, because he believed that much in the direction of the race team. And they said that, it was going to be a struggle with the end of the Gen 6 car, but that they were going to put all their focus on the new car, on the Gen 7, to get better. Well, Corey goes to them. Lo and behold, Justin Marks leaves and goes to form Trackhouse Racing, and we see what he's been able to do. And then I guess Steve Letarte, was never anything more than just a figurehead and a one-time crew chief for Corey. I guess he really doesn't have any say-so there. And as Adam puts it, they're pretty much have been revealed to just be venture capitalist assholes that are not in to make. They're not in it for the sport and the racing. They're just in it to make money. They're essentially just a driver agency at this point. Like they've had like a rotating cast of characters in the 77 car that there's not really much rhyme or reason to them why these guys are in that car. That's even worse than the number 7 is. But Corey has got to find a way out of that situation, and I don't know what might arise for him or what that could be, and if it does arise, if he'll be smart enough to take the chance. But yeah, as a fan of his, I'm pretty sick of him getting burnt because he's been burnt twice, and even though that's partially his fault for being gullible, I'm really ready for a change and something good to happen.
All right. Well, I have a couple more just odds and ends from the race to mention. One is that I really loved the ability for drivers to make slingshot passes on their own, which we haven't seen in many years. Chase Elliott at one point, even though the field was lined up single file, he was able to use the air to pass cars one at a time the old-fashioned way with no help. And that's really cool to see. And I hope that is the norm for Atlanta going forward. Also, Bubba Wallace's old pit crew that's now partially on Christopher Bell's team, they left a wheel loose during their first race on the 20 car. And I am sure Bubba is laughing his ass off right now. And he's like, I've been stuck with that all year. And now someone else has to deal with it. So I have no idea what JGR is doing or what Denny is doing with that. Why don't they just fire the people who can't get their act together? But there's probably some nepotism involved. I've heard that the Jackman is Joe Gibbs' grandson, and that's a problem. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if that terrible pit crew keeps Christopher Bell out of the playoffs, because he's only 18 points above the cut line now. So we'll see what happens there. I guess that's it.
So, is that
all right?
Have about the race in general, or anything else you want to add?
I guess I was gonna add that. What was I gonna add? I actually kind of forgot. I think it was something about LaJoy. I forgot though. So yeah, carry on.
Okay. Oh yeah, I had one more thing, is that it's well known that Martin Truex Jr. has never won a super speedway race, and I think yesterday we saw why. I mean, he restarted on the front row at the end of the race and immediately got shuffled out of the lead, and we never heard from him again. And it's like, and he's in a fast JGR car, much faster than LaJoy's car, and yet LaJoy was able to outmaneuver him and give himself a chance to win, while Truex never had a chance to win. So he's kind of in the infamous tier of good drivers who suck on super speedways, along with Ricky Rudd and Rusty Wallace and Carl Edwards. I'd say are kind of the big four for that.
Yeah, I was going to say that reminds me a couple of funny things. Like one funny thing about that is that like Truex pretty much got 2 chances yesterday, because he came back pretty much from the dead, like after the first incident with Chastain where he got some damage, but he was able to recover, and so he basically, had 2 opportunities to be at the front of the field that didn't end up very well. And then I'm sure, like you heard in Corey LaJoy's interview after the race, did you catch what he said?
Yes.
About the old granny behind us.
Oh yeah,
like he must have somehow gotten hacked our Discord server and seen Merb talk, because that was very similar to something he said about Truex not that long ago. That was a nice little slick little burn that he made on Truex there.
Yeah. I guess I remembered what I was going to say. It was actually about referring to what Adam was saying about how you can kind of really pick guys off with this plate package or the whatever Atlanta is. Yeah, that's I think the biggest thing that I really love about this type of racing is, I mean, in the old days you would always see Dale Jr. Do that type of thing where they always said he and the Earnhardts could see the air or whatever, and he would just maneuver his way through cars one at a time without drafting help, which of course to certain people meant his cars were rigged, but I prefer to think of it as the best plate driver in the field with the best plate cars probably for a while. Um, Doing what that what a driver in that caliber of a car would do. So I think we've seen more of that with Atlanta than we have at Talladega or Daytona in a long, long time, and that's just making me very happy to see this. And some people are going to complain about this because NASCAR fans just tend to complain about everything, even when even when it's a change that they asked for. I mean, there was no enthusiasm at all about Atlanta the past couple of years. Some of those races were absolutely dreadful, and people were begging them to repave the track, but now suddenly we get this repave and it's terrible and it's fake racing and it's whatever people want to say about it. The same way they've bitched about Bristol after all those years they spent saying, "Oh, the old Bristol was better when it was a one groove crash fest every race," and now they make it a dirt race once a year, and suddenly, oh well, we wanted that Bristol back. So everything. Gotta love those rose-colored nostalgia glasses for everything. The grass is always greener on the other side, and I personally, even with this kind of street course thing that they're thinking about doing next year, I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I'm willing to give it a chance if it's just one race every year that they do a street course, hopefully replacing another road course that. So that we don't have this kind of oversaturation of them. And, I'm willing to embrace trying out new things, and if they work, then they work. And I think this Atlanta track is something that really works. And I think a lot of people, though, just kind of predetermine in their minds that something is going to be bad, and then they don't even give it a chance. And when it could put on the greatest race in NASCAR history, and they would find a way to make it a bad thing. So I guess that's all I got to say there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
That was
I just want to talk for a few minutes about the season outlook overall. I think that we've been
talking. Say that we were going to move on to the analytics part of it. So yeah, we talked about the Parker and the race and the Cup Series race. So this is the part of the show that is our calling card, our signature.
Well, what I think has become evident is that the top of the field had been very jumbled for most of the year, where there was no clear number one driver. There was probably 5 or 6 guys that could stake their claim to that. But over the last month, I think it's become obvious that Chase Elliott is the current best driver in Cup. The last 3 weeks, he's finished first, second, and first. He's led the most laps in 2 of those races, and he's outrunning his teammates by a fair amount right now. So I think he's definitely established himself as probably the championship favorite, or at least the favorite to get to the championship 4. And, I don't know if that's going to continue the rest of the season, but it's kind of interesting that it took a full, half the season to have somebody emerge like that. And then I also want to get your guys' thoughts on, do you think that the current 16 drivers in the playoffs are the 16 who are going to make it, or will somebody new bump out Bell, Truex, or Blaney?
I'll just quickly say on that, I think pretty much the only way that changes is if either we get a new winner or Bell's pit crew, which obviously has been Bubba's pit crew, really shits the bed, and Harvick and Almirola, unfortunately, have been kind of really consistency robots all year, backing into all kinds of finishes that are much better than they deserve. And we've been over this. There's a certain skill to finishing better than you run, but there's no skill to just not having certain issues that pit crews or other drivers are the cause for. And it seems like they're kind of benefiting from that a lot, which shouldn't be sustainable. But unfortunately, sometimes a driver will end up with a very overall lucky season. As far as the top of the pecking order, I mean, yeah, obviously Chase at this point. Anybody who says otherwise is just kidding themselves. Just doesn't want to admit that he's as good as he is. Uh, last year those folks really had a field day all year with Larson killing him as much as he killed him. And when Chase won his title in 2020, everybody said that was just a Mickey Mouse title and whatever because of the COVID season. And I don't really know how you justify anything other than, this is now back to full race weekends, and he's led the most laps. He's won the most races. He finally now has passed Ryan Blaney in ETDR for the season. Blaney mainly had the edge on him in that his equipment is not quite as good and that his pass differential was better. He's had worse luck, so that balances itself out. But Chase at this point, I think, has distanced himself for the time being. It's obviously there's a lot of seasons still left, and somebody like Larson or Chastain could get on a run and really take control of things, or Blaney could knock off a few wins, and it's still very much wide open. It's still not at the point where I would say it's like Chase doesn't win the title. It's not a crime, especially considering he won one that was a real toss-up like this. And there's still probably 4 or 5 different guys who you could say they could be the champion, and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be something like Logano in 2018, who I've been going over putting together a lot of the stats from that year. I'm just at the start of the playoffs now, and he's not even going to be, it was the big 3, and then it was him, but he wasn't even 4th best that year, probably not even 5th best. That was just an absolute injustice to the point system that we've easily the worst one that this format has given us, worse than Johnson in 2016, and then I guess depending on how you feel about him not running the full season because he was injured, but Kyle Busch in 2015. But anyway, yeah, I think it's still very wide open, but Chase is the favorite at this point.
Okay, to answer your question, or what Adam said, pretty much what Ryan said about the Chase cutoff. There's, this is a track coming up that is very favorable for Kevin Harvick and Christopher Bell, and you could maybe say Eric Almirola has an outside chance of it after he won last year. Beyond that, you've got just the usual randomness that you could have in the cutoff race at Daytona. Theoretically, anybody that's in the top 30 can win that race, and you can get somebody just from that. I don't really foresee a different result in any other race when it comes to that. So I think that the order will be pretty static in that respect. But I can't predict to you what's going to happen. When all the carnage is through at Daytona. As far as the order at the top, I'm not the analytics expert like you guys are. I'm just going off of the eye test pretty much. Chase has been a top 3 driver all season. The only thing that maybe kept him from being definitively the best for me is that earlier in the season he didn't really have a lot of race winning speed runs or just our top 5 runs. He kind of had a lot of races where he was solid. He just kind of was in that 6th to 10th range. But obviously, recently he has picked it up. He could easily have had 3 straight wins here. Recently, he
Like 4 going back to Sonoma when he had that issue in the pits.
theoretically he could have 5 wins by now for the season. Obviously, he's been by far the best performer for the last month, and I think he's pretty much distanced himself in that respect. And then after that, it's pretty much just a jumble. But Chase has pretty clearly been the best so far. As far as the title goes, I'm not going to tell you who I think like the title favorite is, because there's no way to quantify that with this system. Like this system, we all know it's got nothing to do with who the best driver is over the course of a season. We know that. We all hate it, but it's the way it is. And I'm not going to try to say it. I'm just going to say right now, it looks most likely that Chase will be the best driver for the season. Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you,
I think
about your ETDR ratings. I did want to just ask you one thing about that. I actually read that this Atlanta race, despite it, on the note we were talking about earlier with respect to super speedway racing, that it actually had one of the quote-unquote fairest results of any race this year. Would you here to shine any light on that?
Did. Not all throughout the field. I mentioned Austin Cindric and Cole Custer got top 10 finishes with ETDRs that were below 50, which is very, very bad. It means they were very, very lucky. Like I said, in Custer's case, he was due for finally a finish like that, and I'm actually surprised NASCAR kept his finish because he was involved in the wreck on the last lap. And then we also had on the flip side Denny Hamlin, Kurt Busch, Tyler Reddick, and Corey LaJoie, because of the last lap crash, who all ranked in the top 10 in ETDR while finishing outside the top 20. So it was the top 3 finishers, though, the top 3 ETDR finishers were Elliott, Blaney, and Chastain in that order, who not only finished in the top 5 in the race, but are currently the top 3 for the season in ETDR. So, I do think that overall it's fairer than Daytona or Talladega is.
It was probably the fairest super speedway race we've seen in a long time. I mean, it's not as fair as some, unrestricted tracks. Like, I mean, the boring Martinsville race was fair, very fair. Richmond was fair, things like that. But I think by super speedway standards, you can't really complain about what we saw. And the way I kind of evaluate fairness for plate racing is, look, guys are going to get wrecked out. That's just part of the deal. But among the cars that are still running at the end, did the best cars rise to the top? And in this case, they did for the most part. So that's what I consider fair.
Mm-hmm. I guess the one gripe is I wish there would be less wrecks at this type of race.
For sure.
Like last year I was complaining a bit about having too many races that were squeaky clean, where nobody could have any chances to really get through the field due to qualifying not really being a thing, and then just not being able to have chances to catch up with everybody and pass people on restarts. And but this year it's kind of been like every other race is just you don't really have these long green flag runs with a car that's better at passing throughout the field. And in this type of race in particular, what I loved about those 2000s plate races is it seemed like you had a lot of, especially early in the race, guys would kind of pace themselves a little bit better and not cause stupid-ass wrecks on lap 50 in the middle of the first stage. And, I mean, the all-time example of that I always go back to is the 07 Daytona 500. I thought was just the most climactic buildup of a race that we've ever seen. Lots of spread out racing, and then 2008 was like that too. It was kind of the same thing, just without the crash in the finish. That sort of slow build to then once it gets dark and the sun sets, and that's when you have guys going all out every lap, and yet still doing it for the most part cleanly. It wouldn't be like you didn't have 10 cars get taken out in a wreck. So, yeah, I mean, I really am hoping that maybe one of the races there next year, we have like a full stage that goes green, and we have like, by the end of it, it's maybe a 4 or 5 car lead pack where they're still able to pass each other, and handling comes into play and all that stuff.
Well, I'm not going to say there's no possibility of that happening, but really, for it to happen, they're probably going to have to go up on the horsepower. At 510 with 28 degrees of banking, it's probably not going to happen. If it's not going to happen as hot as it was on Sunday in the sun, it's not going to happen until they make a real big change to it. But you never know. Anything can happen. So, speaking of that, if that's all you guys really needed to say or wanted to about the analytics part of it, I guess we can move on to the other stuff. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the Xfinity race because there really isn't much to talk about there. But actually, in fact, I wanted to just do kind of a 2-for-1 on the Xfinity series because this race there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about. Ty Gibbs was fast, but got wrecked. Sam Mayer made a very bad decision and wrecked. Austin Hill won kind of just a ho-hum event that, like I said, was just kind of a 550 package type race, but in a bad way that happened. But the story that when it comes to the Xfinity Series, that's still pretty much on people's mind is what happened before at Road America. You guys both know what I'm saying, which you can talk about either race you want, circumstance, but I'll just give you two the floor on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead,
I mean,
Ryan.
what can you say other than that? Noah Gragson is just a complete clown. And he's always been a clown like this. I have obviously a ton of respect for Dale Jr., but the way he kind of plays damage control for Noah at this point is just getting to be, it's like, there's a term for it, I would say, but I probably shouldn't.
I think he's just. Sorry about that.
He's very overprotective of him, I think, and it's just he has this blind spot for him that's. And I mean, he said he was surprised that Noah would do what he did. I mean, have you watched the guy the last 4 years? This is he wrecked Myatt Snyder on the straightaway once. He tried to wreck Daniel Hemrick on pit road once. It's like all this guy does is he's just the most dangerous driver out there in any top 3 series, I think. And because it's not like Chastain where he just screws up. I mean, he does this shit intentionally. And, I do respect that he has an entertaining personality, even if it's not a likable one. I do think he's a guy who, if he just kind of refined himself a little bit the way Kurt Busch has, he could be a really likable guy down the road. But, and I mean, you can tell there's a human being in there who, he makes mistakes and he kind of struggles with some things. But it's just not acceptable for a guy to have this much of a reputation for just having no respect for the other guys on the track. And yeah, to take out as many cars as he took out with that, somebody could have seriously gotten injured in there. Brandon Brown, we thought was injured for a little bit, although it turns out he just kind of got hit in an area you don't want to get hit in. But Yeah, I mean he should have been suspended for at least a race for that. I think.
Yeah, I'll just quickly interject on that. Like, you definitely have a point about Junior, and I think some of the reasons I think why he kind of runs defense or interference for Noah, and maybe kind of has a blind spot for him. But having listened to his full Sirius XM interview that they played on NBC, I can tell you right now, I think he's just about reached his breaking point. Like, as much as Junior is going to say, he said a lot. Junior is, I know from listening to him over the years that he is extremely embarrassed over him. Like, he's ashamed. I'm sure that there was a talk that was happening, and I'll say this: I don't think if another thing like this happens that he's going to stand by it. I really believe that. Just my feeling from knowing about Junior and being a fan for all these years, I think that was pretty much the last straw, and Noah's either going to shape up or ship out. So that's the way
Well,
I see it.
yeah, and I just want to say that the main issue that I have with Gregson, besides, I mean, the obvious, is that he hasn't seemed to mature really at all over his 4 full seasons, I think it is, in Xfinity. You know, when a guy like Ty Gibbs, who's 19 years old, I mean, he wrecks people, he acts like an asshole, but it's like he's young, he could outgrow it. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but you can at least give him a little leeway. But Noah is at the point where he's old enough and experienced enough that he just should not be doing this stuff anymore. And there's no excuse left for him, like none. It's like at some point you just have to accept that this is who he is and this is who he's going to continue to be. And I think, not only Junior but any prospective, cup owners who might be thinking about hiring him, they have to really take a hard look and say, do I want a person like this representing my team, and do sponsors want him representing their company? Uh, so I think Noah's going to have an uphill battle trying to get any further in the NASCAR ladder, and he might end up just being an Xfinity lifer because of the way he does things.
Yeah, I was going to say on that, it actually made me think
I thought it
that
was.
Brad Doherty. I like Brad Doherty, even though he doesn't necessarily have the most enlightened takes sometimes. But even he was kind of defending it, say, "Well, no, he's 24 years old, and blah blah blah." And I'm like, when I was 24, I didn't think stuff like that was okay. But everyone's entitled to their opinion. But what I really found fascinating was Jeff Burton. As we all know, normally Jeff Burton, will not say much of anything or go out on a limb at all, to put it mildly. But he absolutely just ripped Noah to shreds. Like on I think it was the Motor Mouth program that I saw last week. I hadn't seen Jeff Burton that animated in a long time. Like, he was pissed off at what Noah was doing, and you got the sense that if his son, let's say for example, Harrison was doing something like what Noah did, he would not be happy, and he would not be taking it well at all. That was something I had not seen in a long time. Jeff Burton that angry, and that tells you how bad the situation is.
Yeah, what I loved about this whole thing, and of course I mean that completely sarcastically, is Noah apparently going around to everybody in the Colleague shop apologizing, but only the Colleague shop, because that's who he's getting his cup races with, which basically told me, I'm not really sorry. I'm just sorry for giving your team a bad look for having me race for you in these cup races, and please give me a cup ride next year, full time. If he were really sorry, he would have apologized to the other owners in the garage whose cars he tore up because of that. So yeah, some people are just going to be who they are, and he's going to have to learn his lesson the hard way.
Anything you wanted to say about this week's race before I move on to my other auto racing stuff? Or
I guess just the whole irony, I guess, of Austin Hill winning on the same day as Parker Kligerman when apparently there was some sort of deal that fell through where Kligerman was supposed to be driving that car this year, but Hill kind of bought him out, I guess to put it nicely. That which is not the first time he's done that either. It happened in trucks with Hattori Racing when he was when Brett Moffitt was in that truck. Although I think he didn't have any funding anyway after that title year. So, but yeah, I mean Parker is still the story from that day. Hill is just kind of a footnote, and I mean it's not his fault. It's just the way the sport unfortunately is. But I mean it does kind of rub you the wrong way when something like that happens. And I mean he has talent though. He's probably not going to be a serious Cup prospect at his age, but he's obviously a great plate driver. I guess for now he's kind of like the new Justin Haley of the Xfinity series in a way. Um,
Yeah. On
so
that note,
yeah,
I would. Yeah. Hopefully, nothing like we haven't talked about it on this show, obviously, but like if you were a member of our chat where we talk about this stuff, in depth a lot, you would think that we all just hate the hell out of Austin Hill, and that this is it's an Austin Hill haters club, and that's not it at all. But, you can't fault him for just being there and being lucky and taking advantage of a situation that fell into his lap that very few people get, and when you get a chance like that, you have to take it. And there's nothing. He's been successful. He's done nothing wrong in that respect. But it's just frustrating that the way the situation worked out. There's definitely some jealousy, I guess, on our part that comes with that, and it's not real. It's not right, I guess, but it's just was ironic, kind of fitting that it happened that way. But you know, on that note, like you said, footnote, nothing against Austin Hill, but hopefully he'll be more of the Justin Haley kind of footnote, and Parker Kligerman will be more of the Alex Bowman kind of footnote. Little inside joke there.
yeah, oh yeah, classic racing reference moment.
Yeah. Well, anyways,
So yeah, I guess we'll move into
well, I was going to say just
predictions for next week.
I was just going to say one thing on one other topic for me myself, and then we'll go to that. Adam, do you want to say anything else about Xfinity or? I guess he had to go.
We've lost Adam.
Well, I'll just say, because I know you don't watch it, obviously, and I know that it's a punching bag for us sometimes. That way, we'll talk crap about F1 here and there, but it is still a form of racing, and it can be entertaining sometimes. And it happened, and we're not going to talk about it every week, every race. But I will say the last two races have been pretty entertaining by F1 standards. The race at Silverstone actually had more on-track lead changes than the Cup race at Road America did. And there were actually, I think, 3 or 4 that happened in this race in Austria. Basically, the rundown of it is that at the start of the season, it looked like Ferrari were actually for real. Normally, during the off-season, anybody that follows the sport knows that like every other offseason, Ferrari gets hyped up, and everyone say, "Oh, this is the year that they're going to be back, that they're going to be challenging, they're going to win the title this year," which they haven't since they won it with Kimi 15 years ago. And it's always some combination of result of they may do well for a while, or they may not, or they may just completely fall flat and embarrass themselves, but it never ends up really being anything but hype. Well, at the start of this season, it actually looked like they were for real. They were the fastest car at the start. At the beginning, Leclerc looked like he was going to be in command of the championship after won 2 of the first 3 races and had a healthy points lead. But it didn't really take long for Red Bull to overtake Ferrari in terms of speed. And then the Ferrari clown show that we pretty much have become accustomed to in the last decade started in. Ferrari's had a number of mechanical failures recently and strategy screw-ups and and drama at the team and so on that's affected them. And and with that happening, it's allowed Max to have what to this point had been a pretty dominant season, and he had almost a 2-race points lead going into this most recent race, and 6 wins out of 10 races. But this time, Ferrari was back on their game, and Charles drove a really impressive race, made not 1, not 2, but I think 3 on-track passes for the lead over Max Verstappen in this race to win and knock the championship down somewhat, although Max is still in charge of it pretty much. And I want to give a shout out to George Russell and Mick Schumacher. After really, really struggling and being rumored to not have a ride after this season, Mick Schumacher now officially looks like a F1 caliber driver. Like that was his best weekend that he's ever had by far. And it's really nice to see that. And George Russell, after some early problems, drove all the way from 19th up to 4th, just behind his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who got a podium by way of some attrition. And he's continuing to really, shine in a Mercedes that is nowhere near as good as it has been. Still isn't terrible, but obviously isn't anywhere near the same level as the Red Bull and Ferrari are. But there's a lot of annoying things about F1 that still keeps it well below NASCAR, in my opinion. But I must say that other than some gripes here and there, I've enjoyed the last 2 races. So there we go. So I guess it's time to finish off with predictions for this week at Loud.
Unfortunately, Adam just notified us that he had to go. I guess we've kind of gone a bit too long today. I mean, we are kind of trying to just figure this out without any experienced moderator here. So I guess I'll make my Loudon pick, and Jake, cover your ears, because I kind of think Stuart Haas has been really fast on these types of tracks, and this was a race he was really good in last year, and so I think we finally see Kevin Harvick get another win this week. So I'm hoping it doesn't happen. It would be definitely very refreshing to see him miss the playoffs the way Jimmy Johnson had to struggle and miss the playoffs at the end of his career. And I think after the Chase incident last year at Bristol and at the Roval, I'm kind of hoping he doesn't win again the rest of his career. Although I also think that for him to end his career with the 9 wins in 2020 and then never win again after that would be kind of unfair at the same time. So I don't know. I think this is one of the best chances for it if it does.
Nothing wrong with that pick at all. That's a solid pick. My ass is definitely puckered up this week about it, because I know that. I mean,
well, he's a solid pick for you every week because you hate him. So
yeah, I mean, it could happen. Anything can happen anywhere, like especially at a super speedway potentially. But this is his best chance at winning, and I'm definitely concerned about that. But as far as my pick, I don't really think about this stuff a lot, or even think about it. I can't give you some kind of concrete pick based off of a lot of evidence, but I don't know. I kind of feel like this might be Martin Truex's week. He's picked his performance up recently after, I guess, finally, kind of as a message to all the people that were kind of talking about him retiring. Like, I guess he maybe took a little bit of offense to that and is motivated because of it. And so I could see him doing well this week, but that definitely could be a solid pick too. Either one of them can happen. As far as what you said about the Harvick thing, I wish him well as a human being, but I cannot say at all that I think it would be unfair for him to never win again after 2020, because he's Kevin Harvick, and well, that's really all that needs to be said from my point of view. So, sorry to you Kevin Harvick fans out there. But
Yeah, well, actually, we might have in the next couple of weeks a Kevin Harvick fan as a guest on here. So more on that if it when it happens. So
People.
yep. I think though Hendrick probably is, and Chevy in general probably won't really do much this week. This just hasn't been one of their tracks really. Although I could see Trackhouse being strong. But I think Chase, Larson, all the Hendrick guys, and probably Reddick probably aren't really going to be contenders. It's going to be kind of Gibbs versus Ford. Christopher Bell could be another guy who could factor. Him, Truex, Harvick, Almirola, all being right on that chase or playoff cut line. I think that could be pretty interesting. And I think one of those four guys probably is going to win. And really one of the three, because I highly doubt Almirola would have that kind of race again.
Yeah. I think as far as Hendrick goes, pretty much Chase is the only guy that may contend, and the others are going to be, well, probably not doing too well. And I pretty much agree with the rest of what you said as far as that goes. And main thing, I just hope that we have a good race this weekend. I'm just going to be frank and honest. The evidence this year on tracks like this would suggest that it's not going to be a good race, and that we're just going to have to hope for the best on that. I'm not going to expect it to be anything like the quality that we've had in recent New Hampshire races, which has been excellent. But who knows? Maybe we'll get surprised. We'll see how it plays out.
Please just don't put any of that PJ1 bull crap down or whatever it is. There's not a single track that makes the racing better on. And it's artificial, and I would rather they just let the track run as it is. But even with it, or even without it, we'll get what we get. Maybe, I guess, best case scenario, we could have some interesting pit strategies that kind of spice it up the way they spiced up Gateway. But yeah, we'll just see what happens. I think that's kind of all we've got to cover today.
Yeah, amen to that on the PJ1. I think the drivers maybe sort of like it, but from a fan standpoint, it's been just garbage. Like very few races that have been good where it's been used. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it all. Despite only being 3 people, we still managed to have more than enough material for the show, which I was happy to see. I know for all those of you listening here that this probably sounded a bit rough. Sorry about that. I kind of got thrust into this role. We kind of all got thrust into this position that we are in right now, just due to circumstances, and just like it was at the very beginning, it's going to be a learning curve, and it's going to take some time, but we will work at it. We're committing to making this work, and we'll get better and make the show more entertaining for you guys. And we're learning at this just like everybody else. And so thank you guys for all your support. We appreciate it. This episode is dedicated to Alex and Merb, who couldn't be with us today. Merb will be back next month, but not for the next couple of weeks. I don't know when Alex will be able to come on with us as a guest, but we will definitely have him when the circumstances allow it. Thanks to my friend Ryan for coming on here and giving his analysis, even though he had to go. Thanks to Adam, too. The TRC podcast is me, Jake, the host / moderator and temporary producer, Ryan, our head analyst, and Adam, our co-head analyst. This has been the TRC podcast. Thank all you for listening, and we'll see you next time.